Though the prospect of Fire Emblem entering the third dimension may have happened with the GameCube, plans for a 3D installment could be traced back to the Nintendo 64, and the only cancelled game in the series, Fire Emblem 64. No screenshot or gameplay was ever shown about this title, though many interviews with series creator Shozo Kaga suggested that the title was meant to be a continuation of the Akaniya saga. During an interview with Shigeru Miyamoto in July 1997, Fire Emblem 64 was said to be in early stages of development, along with Mario RPG 2. Mario RPG 2 would eventually turn into Paper Mario, but the elusive Fire Emblem 64 was cancelled due to unsuitable hardware specs and would instead have the next installment, 3CS776, released on the Super Famicom on September 1st, 1999. Shozo Kaga eventually left Intelligent Systems shortly before its release on August 15, 1999 to form his own company, Turdanog, and create Tearing Saga, a series which led to a famous lawsuit filed by Intelligent Systems and Nintendo for copyright infringement on the Fire Emblem series. Supposedly, all work done on Fire Emblem 64 was moved on to Fire Emblem Ankoku no Miko, which would eventually become Fire Emblem Fueno Tsurugi. Though Fire Emblem would go on without either of its original creators, it would take less than a decade for Fire Emblem to finally embrace the third dimension. Announced April 2nd, 2004 via Shonen Jump, Fire Emblem Hueno no Kuseki was set for release in April of 2005. Masahiro Sakaguchi was in charge of developing the title, and Yuka Sugioka once again helmed the score as sound supervisor. Cutscenes were done by Production IG, whose work includes Tales of Symphonia for the GameCube and Batman Gotham Knight. Released on the GameCube on October 17, 2005, Fire Emblem Path of Radiance was the second title in the series to be released that year, the first time in 3D, and the first game to include something from BS Fire Emblem, voice acting.
Well, Ike, you had enough?
In the region of Tellius, a young boy named Ike trains to be a part of his father's company, the Grail Mercenaries, in the territory Crimea, until one day, the neighboring nation of Dayan invades the country and takes the capital. At the same time, Ike discovers a girl in the forest who turns out to be the last royal heir to the throne, Princess Elincia. With their home country and the company in danger, the Grail Mercenaries take her to the Laguz territory of Gallia, only to lose their titular leader along the way. Now without a leader to their company, Ike takes over and leads the remaining Grail Mercenaries and Elincia to Benyon to begin a campaign for returning the land of Crimea to its true heir to the throne. Throughout the entire game, Ike would have to be a mediator between the conflicting races of Laguz and Bayark in order to gain support from both in liberating Crimea and lead his band of mercenaries in battle in order to defeat the hostile Dayan forces, the powerful Four Riders, the Mad King Ashnard, and avenge his father's death at the hands of the Black Knight. Though the main villain was a tyrant and a madman who cared for nothing but his goals, many players saw the black-clad swordsman as the true antagonist for Ike to defeat. The most mysterious of the Four Riders, the Black Knight was an expert swordsman whose armor was blessed by the goddess and could only be damaged by the blade Ragnell. At the time of Path of Radiance, the identity of the terrifying Great Rider was unknown to everyone except his former teacher, Gawain, known to others as Grail, who he murdered.
Your voice. I remember you. Think you can defeat me, the man who taught you how to fight? What a fool.
All of this lack of information further surrounded him in mystery when the castle fell over the night in his darkest hour. Fire Emblem Path of Radiance built upon what had been done on the Game Boy Advance while further reintroducing concepts from previous titles and in some respects expanding upon them. It introduced a secondary trinity of magic, the tomb equivalent of the weapons triangle, which involved wind, fire, and lightning. Skills made a big return from Seizo no Keifu, with some units possessing them right from the start and others gaining them through special scrolls. Characters would automatically change classes upon leveling up beyond 20, with few exceptions like Ike and the two playable thieves, though class items were still intact in limited quantity for the impatient. Base Operation B4 maps let players distribute bonus experience to choice units, buy or sell items, or suit up their units with new equipment that they either bought or forged before using it on the battlefield. Support conversations were no longer done on the battlefield. Instead, they became yet another one of the many base options in between battles. Non-support conversations between characters also occurred, revealing more about the many mercenaries, their allies and enemies, Tellius' history, and sometimes yielded special items. Reports were given after every battle that showed new units, earnings, and bonus experience gained, all of which could be put to use on the front lines. On the field, allied units not under your control called partners could be directed to halt, attack, defend, or move to a targeted area. New to the fray were the Laggoos, a species of Tellius that could transform into powerful animals to fight but were otherwise helpless in their human-like form or once their transform meter hit 0. Enemies could be selected to display their range, letting players know if their more frail units were in danger, and weapons looked distinct when used in battle. Aesthetically, the interface remained largely the same in combat. Once again, players would have to route their enemies off the map, though they did it this time with far more options than ever before. Significant changes were made to Path of Radiance for its worldwide release. In addition to Swordmasters, Berserkers, and Snipers being given a 15% increase for critical hits, which had been done in previously localized titles, Maniac mode was removed and replaced with an easy mode, and the ability to connect with Fuenos or Gi was dropped, though a trial map could be unlocked by linking up a copy of Fire Emblem or Fire Emblem with Sacred Stones. When it was released in North America, critics gave Fire Emblem Path of Radiance high remarks for its orchestrated score, quality cutscenes, and deep story that the series was expected to have at that point. Less praise was given, however, to the often lengthy sessions of dialogue. The most common criticism was the visual design and presentation, which, for the GameCube, was seen as lackluster when compared to other Nintendo titles such as The Legend of Zelda Wind Waker and Metroid Prime. Likewise, the sales figures disappointed as well, with an astonishing drop to 540,000 copies sold worldwide, 250,000 of which were sold in North American territory. Still, visual and financial shortcomings aside, Fire Emblem Path of Radiance did one thing exceptionally well. It finally brought over one of Nintendo's oldest franchises into the third dimension while preserving everything the series was known for and would continue to be in its sequel. Come back next week for the sequel to Ike's adventure as Chaos and Order clash in a godly judgment for war and countless revelations about the Mad King's War.
Well, I can't talk about this game without talking about yet another Nintendo GameCube game. Which one? That's right, Metroid Prime. You see, just like Fire Emblem, Metroid made its jump to 3D a few years back, and it was an incredible experience. The atmosphere, the music, the gameplay, it's all near perfect. It is one of the best games on the GameCube, and one of the best games Nintendo has made, period. It's also one of their best 2D to 3D conversions. Fire Emblem Path of Radiance is one of the better ones, but it's definitely not in the top 3, not by a long shot. It was definitely much more of an evolution of the series than it was an actual transformation. Ocarina of Time, Mario 64, and Metroid Prime all fit the bill when it comes to that. They completely transformed what it meant to be a Metroid, Mario, or Zelda game, if not perfecting the formula. All three of them were not just revolutionary for their time, but for their genres. But let's get back to Path of Radiance. Out of all the stories told in the Fire Emblem series thus far, or at least the ones in English, this one is probably the most thought-provoking out of all of them, mainly because of the underlying theme of prejudice. True, in Rekka no Ken there was a chapter called Blood of Pride which very briefly touched on this, but this entire game has this underlying and subtle theme, not to mention transformation of characters revolving around prejudice. It's a great way of showing this character growth that Ike goes through. As a young adult, he's naive and very judgmental, but in the end, his character growth becomes much more adult and leader-like. There are obviously other characters like Soren who go through a similar transformation, but I find Ike's the most fascinating, not to mention the most developed out of all of them. The rest of the cast is equally colorful, and there are definitely some characters that you'll just love to hate. On top of that, the villains are just great. There's the Mad King Ashnard, who's one evil bastard who you just want to kill right from the start when you see him. And the Black Knight, who has a near-perfect balance of intimidation and mysteriousness. As for the gameplay, it's classic Fire Emblem, and when I mean classic, I mean they went back to the classic Fire Emblem game, Seizen no Keifu, and took elements from that to inject into this game. Skills are brought back, though unlike Sacred Stones, characters can actually be equipped with them, and some will actually have their own exclusive ones. It's a neat idea that actually adds on to the characters and makes them much more customizable. Speaking of which, if you have the Gold Despair, you can actually forge your own weapon. You can even give it a name if you like. One last notable addition to gameplay that comes to mind is the Laggoos. While I think the Lagoos were a good substitution for the Manichees, I do have to admit from a gameplay perspective, they're very splitting. On one hand, they are incredibly powerful units when in beast mode, and they can absolutely destroy the enemy forces. But on the other hand, once they run out, you're basically down a unit. Well, unless you're wearing a special item, or if you're a special Lagoos. Lastly, there's the soundtrack which Yuka Tsuchioka was actually heavily involved with, and it sounds excellent. The orchestral scores are some of the best in the series overall. And overall, it's probably my second favorite out of all the Fire Emblem games. If you can find it, pick it up. Path of Radiance is one bright game in the series.